Fine.
Okay, start streaming. And so you want to,
So we're both going.
okay.
And then,
You want to just do 3, 2, 1 and countdown?
yeah, who's counting it?
Okay, I'll do. 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm just doing a warm up
Oh,
sketch.
hi, I'm Owen.
Oh, hi, I'm Mike.
This
This is
is
a test.
this is a test.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, what I'm doing is just some Riley method warm up sketches. Just I working on basic forms. I like drawing people because they're more entertaining than drawing
So,
cows and
so
environments.
there's something interesting. What's Riley method? If you
Well, it's it'd be easier if I started from the beginning, like if I did another one. But like you see here, you can look at this image, right?
hmm
And I've blocked out all the forms. I've roughed it in pretty good, right? And so you got the guy's image on the left, and you got this guy here. And Riley method is just more a way of it's a quick sketch method that I've picked up from. I first came across it on a guy on the web. His name's Chris Legaspi, or I don't know if I pronounced his name. Probably butchered it. But this is sort of how he was doing tutorials on drawing,
hmm
right? And then he said it's the Riley method, based off of an artist named Riley. And it's a quick way to sketch, and basically you're blocking in your midtones, right? And you're focusing just on the big shapes, the shapes of your the shape of the shadow, the shape of the face, the shape of whatever. And it's just a nice quick way to do it. It's more advanced, I've found. If I look at it, like if you're a beginning artist, like if you're just learning to draw,
hmm
you kind of need to have a good comprehension of things like anatomy and structure and all that stuff before you can really make this work for you. So I would say it's intermediate to advanced way to do quick sketching. Um, but maybe not for other people. It depends on how we all kind of see things differently, and we all, have different techniques that we can draw from. But yeah, I find for me it's a nice quick way to do it, as opposed to I used to do a lot of my warm up or my drawings more of an Andrew Loomis type method, where it's you break out, here's your form, and there's the nose, and you work out the geometry of all the planes, and you
Right.
know all that kind of stuff, right? This way I still apply that, but on a much reduced scale.
So would you say this is less constructive and more like I don't know, more intuitive, or is it equally constructive? Because it looks like you have a lot of construction, so it's not.
Yeah, no, there's lots of. You do have to do your construction, right? But I guess, look here. You state so much of the form just in the shape of the shadows,
Right.
right? So you are basically, you got mid-tone, light, and then your lines are your dark, right? So, and then you can go back into it and really restate all your darks if you really want to, right?
Right.
Like here. So you can really easily block it out, and it breaks it down into three values quickly, right? Your three main values, and then you can refine it ad infinitum if you want
Right.
to, but it's just, for me, it's worked out. I've gravitated towards it as I've learned, as my drawing uh, skills or practice has evolved over time. Another guy I like to do is more of an Robert Fawcett technique, but he doesn't really even do construction. He just draws what he sees. So he'll just, I see this and I see this, and I'm going to draw it and work out.
Just like blocks of light and shadow, or different,
Yeah,
or just line work.
line work, more or less. He's just an incredible draftsman.
Right.
It's
Yeah, which is
so.
something you really have to build up over time. It's not
Oh
a.
yeah, if you look at him and his practice though of drawing, he never. Well, here's like some other ones I've done while we've been talking today. So I did this guy here, and I did this one while we were talking. And then here's some quicker gestures. right?
Right.
This is a little more like Fawcett would advocate drawing. He would advocate trying to get the form down quickly and spontaneously, right? Like, and then refine backward. Like this is from the day when you would do roughs and then you do layers, overlays in the transparent paper until you would eventually refine your illustration. Right now we have layers in Photoshop, and
Right.
or even animators would do it with blue line pencil, right? And then they would go over it and fix up the lines and make your corrections, right? But the point is, you want to have a here, I'm going to do another layer just to make it easier so I don't screw up the drawing. You want to have your gesture. You want to have like, see the marks here, they're quick, they're loose, there's
Right.
some curve, that kind of thing. You want to have energy in your first sketch, right? It's hard to add energy to a drawing later
Right,
on as you
especially
refine
as
it.
you get details you
Yeah.
kind of get stuck on that you can't.
Yeah, those tend to stiffen the image up, right? So if you, I think one of his terms was you can't make a drawing. Sorry, I don't know. I can't remember. I'm not going to quote him, but you want to start off with as much energy as you can in your sketch, and then try to make or keep or maintain as much of that energy in the sketch into the final illustration, right? That's how it doesn't. The process doesn't work in reverse. You can't add energy to the drawing. You have to start with the energy
Right.
and then expand on it. Or
Yeah, well,
work with it.
just like your lines of action stuff
Oh,
that
I
you
do.
use in animation. So
Yeah, same thing.
that
I mean,
your flow lines, but that tends to be temporal. Like you're trying to do flow over time, but in
Right.
this you're trying to do in your illustration you're trying to do flow over space, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
which I guess you do in
Like,
animation
I
as
don't know
well.
if you've
But
looked at. I got a book here, Motion, but I can't remember who the author is. But he's Ron Lemon, I think, is who it is. He's an animator, but like you want to focus on these lines of action, right? What are the basic lines of motion with your thing? So you can maintain movement, right? And you want your contour to sort of accentuate that, right? So you just want to. That's how you maintain these energies. But that is a language that's evolved since Fawcett's time, right? Like he was a Silver Age illustrator in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, right? And animation, although it was quite alive and vibrant, it was sort of considered I think at that time it was more of a trade, a niche industry, that sort of stuff. Now animation principles overlap into all illustration, or to a lot of illustration, whereas before, animation I think was used only for feature films or cartoons, and then
right.
children's book stuff, right? But now we're using a lot of those animation principles have overlapped into figure drawing techniques in art school, right? Like capturing the form and the figure and the gesture, some of the way they do it. Like the best figure drawing people I've ever seen are animators, without a doubt.
Oh
In
yeah,
my,
yeah.
They can just capture the form so well, and this got me thinking about. I was reading How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way.
Yeah.
It's a great book, but it's got me thinking about the visual language of art, right? Like how it's been refined now. Like would a guy like John Buscema, going back to the 17th century, his draftsmanship skills would blow everybody away, right?
Oh yeah.
And but it's a very specific visual language that he uses. Like he's drawing everything from his head. He has references, but he's able to create fictional events and tell a narrative virtually out of his imagination. He can tell whatever story he wants, right? But that's a skill set that he's evolved that's particular to that industry. And a lot of I've noticed a lot of the stuff that's been established in comic books, like draw the heroic figure has 8 heads.
Right. Yeah.
That started kind of with Andrew Loomis back in the 40s, 50s, but it's really taken form now in our thing. Like if I draw a guy and he's only 6 heads tall, people kind of question and go, "Well, what the hell's wrong? Something's wrong with the illustration." It's, well, no, that's what the person really looks like. And they go, "Well, but it doesn't look heroic enough, or it doesn't quite fit, or something looks wrong." You know?
Yeah, because it's a language we've become accustomed to, not necessarily. It's not a reflection of any kind of reality. It's like film. People being accustomed to the cut, or accustomed to especially light changes, becoming accustomed to changes in light as changes in time, and that's not a thing. Like that doesn't necessarily mean that time has gone by because it's gone from lighter to darker or vice versa. You know, but that's our visual language in film. So
Yeah,
that's what tells the story.
I think we've just these forms of media have been so inundated in our culture now, like the way we communicate, that it's sort of expected, or you know, it's just how we've evolved, or how the language of communication visually has evolved. And yeah, it's interesting to think about, you know, how much we learn, or how much we have learned, and how we apply it. Like I like to collect books on outdated art techniques, you know, and like how to use an airbrush, things like that. People don't even really use them that much anymore, for at least a lot of my industry, right? It's just not, everything's digital now, right? And you look at some of these books on how to draw, and there's so many methods of how to draw, right? And some gravitate, like people prefer the Hogarth method, or the Bridgman method, or the Loomis method. You know, everyone's got different techniques and different ways to do it, right? And I think it really comes down to what works best for you as the, you know, and what your goal is, right? Like, what are you trying?
Hogarth still doesn't really mean a lot to me. Like I get the techniques, but it doesn't really. But Bridgman really, that was like, that made sense to me, and I think that comes from a place of from modeling, like from 3D modeling, having this idea that you have to construct shapes from the inside out, and that things are, you know, everything is volumes of simple shapes,
right,
that are butted and chunked together, and not volumes of curved wedges. Because a curved wedge in 3D art is a tricky thing. That's not your go-to. But a block or a sphere that just comes out of the primitives panel, so you just plunk them down. So you kind of get used to that way of thinking.
Yeah, I think gravitating to what works best for you, you know. I think it's nice. Like, there are choices, and there's just different options. You got to try them all before you figure out really what works. And they all apply. Like, sometimes I'll switch between, like, okay, I'm gonna, like, when I'm drawing, so I can't figure this out. But if I switch to the Loomis technique and start blocking it in, then this makes sense to me, right? It's like giving yourself as many tools as you can in the toolbox, and then also what your goal is, right? Like, if I want a hyper-realistic sort of rendering of somebody, the best way, or of an illustration, the best way to do it for me is to do an underpainting first, to really work out my values, and then go in from there, because then I've already resolved a lot of that, as opposed to just, you know, jumping into it. But if I'm doing a portrait of someone from life, or from direct reference, well, I don't need to work out the values, because they're all there for me in the reference. I'm just recording it, you know, so, you know, you use different things for.
Have you heard of there's this movie, Tim's Vermeer?
No.
Have you heard that?
No. What is it?
I guess he was the former head of NewTek, or maybe like the technical head of NewTek, like created Lightwave and Video Toaster and that sort of stuff. He was looking at a bunch of Vermeer paintings, right? And getting all into how did he do this capturing light so precisely, and just thought he was an amazing painter. And this guy, coming from being a technician and a programmer and an electrical engineer, or that kind of mindset, looks at it and thinks like, I think I know how he did this, and proceeds over the course of a couple years to design and develop this machine that's a mirror set on this like monopod unit, that he can look at the actual scene and then compare light values from one to the other, back and forth, and he just puts down the stroke that's needed for that spot. So it's like kind of breaking it down into a pixelized view, so that every pixel has a value.
Right.
And so he does this, and then sets out to recreate Vermeer painting, and by the end of it, does it. Like, coming from not being a painter at all, he and not, like, by his own admission, not understanding anything about construction, volume, rhythm of movement, anything, nothing about that. Just based on this machine and values of light, and does it. Just recreates this painting exactly, and they kind of figure now that this is how a whole bunch of these painters of the era, and they just protected all their secrets through guilds, and that they just would recreate them based on
they would use prisms
technique.
kind of thing.
It was just as, I don't know, you'd have to see, if you look up Tim's Vermeer, there's a picture of this guy, and he's doing like a black and white portrait, and it's stunning, and he's just going off this photo, and he says, like, this is the first oil painting I have ever done in my life, and it's just like spot on, looks great.
Really?
And it's just because he just does it like a photocopier. And then when they compare it to how Vermeer painted, it's like, well, that's pretty much it. That's how he did it.
Good job. Yeah.
So it was these.
They had different techniques back in the day that they would use. Like, I'm reading a book by Joseph Solomon, who was an instructor at the British Academy, and quite a good, like, really amazing painter. So he wrote this book in like the 1920s, I think, and he refers a lot to a tool called an art glass, right? Which what the hell's an art glass? I've never heard of that before. But I think what it was a prism that he would use so he'd hold it up to his image, whatever, and look at it, kind of how we would flip horizontal in Photoshop, right? You'd flip it in reverse, so you could look at it and compare. And he had other techniques, and his method of drawing is different because he didn't do the construction so much as he would focus on the negative space and the contour. So if you're looking at what I'm doing here, see the shape between the soldiers, like that sort of like a triangular or a rectangular shape between his face and his arm, right? So this area, he would focus on this,
filling
the negative space, right? So he would draw the contour based on the negative space, right? And then he would kind of, extrapolate and work backward from that.
And
right?
then use this art glass to make sure that he's drawing the line in the right spot. Yeah, he would train himself though, so he would carefully make each mark, whereas I make searching marks and marks more about, like, in this particular, these are just rough quick studies, right? But he would do this in a way where he would go, okay, instead of me making searching marks like this, and okay, it's going to go roughly here, and then I'll go back into it and refine the line, and that was how I learned how to draw more, right?
find the line. You know, it's okay to draw messy. You know, it's a sketch. Da da da. He would more go, okay, well, no, I'm going to look at this and say this line
Right.
is like this. You know, and he would measure carefully, like the space between the nose and whatever. Okay, so it should be a little bit closer. You know, and he would line things up and take his time more. At least as I understand his technique right now for drawing, right? Like I'm sure he would do his construction stuff too and make sure everything lined up and you had your perspectives and you know he would do all that, but he did place a particular emphasis on the contour from the negative spaces, as we'd call it negative space now. He didn't
Right.
call it that back then, but he would definitely, you know, he would do a lot of his measurements and lining up just based off of this space here. You know, and that's not something that, like, it's something we did do in art school, and we were taught to capture the gesture
Oh yeah.
and then the contour.
That's all. Yeah, we did
Yeah.
so much contour.
Yeah, it was always about but I never really understood why necessarily until I started reading his book, right? Like he talks about it and explains it better than my art teachers ever did. You know,
Oh,
they
that's
just said,
a shocking surprise.
yeah, like you know, do the contour and done, right? Whereas, you know, for them it was more about the act of the contour was more important than getting it right.
Yeah.
You know, like getting your gesture with your wrist just so, and having, like, drawing for drawing's sake was more important than drawing for accuracy's sake. Let's put it that way. You know, in my art school experience. So we weren't. Whereas this guy, it was all about accuracy and integrity of your mark making and making your statement accurately, getting what you want done properly. So yeah, I guess it's what your art goals are. But my point is, yeah, he used different techniques that we don't necessarily use or teach anymore. And you know, these guys knew how to paint. They also,
yeah.
a lot of them too. Like there was an article today in Gurney Journey, and he talks about this one artist who said, you know, and how to become better as a young artist was to strive to win the prize of Rome or the Prix de Rome in Paris, right?
Right.
But the point is, okay, this is your goal, and do nothing, work on nothing except something that will help you achieve that goal. Don't waste your time, basically. And this guy, but you also got to think back then, they started working professionally and, you know, or apprenticing professionally at such a young age, right? It's like, I'm going to be like this guy, his dad was a painter, so he grew up painting with his dad.
Right.
Right.
When it was a notable trade, like it was something that
Yeah.
I guess it still is, but I don't think it's
It doesn't have
considered the same way.
No, not in North America, anyways. We don't have the same. It doesn't have the same impact or cultural significance that it might have had then for them. So yeah, this guy, he'd been working at it it's his craft and his trade since he was, you know, in his tweens, probably when he was 12 years old, and he probably been painting since he probably started apprenticing when he was 12 or 15, and he'd been painting as soon as he could hold a brush, right? And that was his craft. But they would, if you look at the modeling that goes into a lot of their pieces, right, like of the form. Let's see here. I think I saved one of his images earlier today. Here we go. Like, look at that. That's just a study.
Right.
But see how soft the
Yeah.
transitions are on the face, right? That's not something you achieve without blending and taking your time. Like the subtle transitions between the highlight on the forehead to the shadow on the side of his temple, that's a very subtle transition.
Oh yeah.
That takes time. And the contour of the face, right? And it's all stylized as well and accurate. But you can tell he spent a lot of time making sure he got that right.
Mm-hmm.
And that just takes I find nowadays we're not as like this could take him hours to do, or
Right.
maybe not, I don't know, but it takes a lot of skill to be able to do this quickly. And my point is, these guys put the time and effort and energy into a piece, and they'd make a painting that's as big as a wall, and they would spend half a year to a year on it, you know. But it was worth it in the end. And I find with digital media, you have a lot of artists who only put in the merit, like they want to be able to crank out a cover piece in 8 hours, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot of them can, or they crank out, like you see guys, they use different techniques to crank out concept art fast and dirty. And, you know, I don't think we really have a concept of how much time goes into these pieces. Sometimes it could be a few hours, sometimes it could be 60 or 80, you know. But the value is the same, you know, unless you have an established name like Brad Rigney, who does a lot of wizard stuff and concept art, and he hyper renders everything he does. And he says in his videos it takes him 60 to 80 hours to do something, which to me is, I don't see how he can make any money if that's the truth, unless he's getting crazy high rates, you know, because 60 to 8 hours on one wizard card, that doesn't seem to make sense, you know.
Yeah, oh, maybe.
You know,
Maybe
so
they're paying them the buku bucks.
yeah, you'd have
Maybe
to.
maybe they just pay him in meth.
Yeah.
He's like, well, I can work 60 hours again. I'm all
Well,
tweaked out.
I'm sure how it was presented might be out of context to what it is, but I guess the point is, to get a real high level of polish, the only way to do it is to take time.